Hi, this is Danielle
And Jonathan Keperling.
from Keperling Preservation Services. Today is Earth Day, so we thought we'd talk about why historic home is, or historic buildings just in general, are more energy efficient and greener than some other buildings that are new. And we'll also talk about 8 ways that you can make your historic home green. If you have any questions, if you have anything specific, let us know. We'll answer them at the end. So there's a saying in preservation that the greenest building is one that's already made, or one that's already built. And that takes into account the concept of embodied energy. So the energy that was used to cut that tree down, bring the tree to the mill, mill it into lumber. The labor that was put in to build it and put it all together, that's embodied energy. And when you destroy a building that's already built, you lose all of that energy, and you have to pull those resources out of the earth to build a new building. So that is why they say the greenest building is one that's already built. So so that's like one concept that was kind of like maybe 10 years ago I learned at a traditional building conference, and I was like, that really makes a lot of sense to me. And the other concept that I learned at that conference was the idea of these green building products. It was when they were starting to really push these green, sustainable building products that were for new buildings. And the idea that was presented there was that, hi Joe, was that I got thrown off. That green products should be repairable. And so, like, if you have an old house and you have an old sash, there are components on that can be repaired. Whereas if you have a modern sash, if something starts to go bad on that, typically you have to tear the entire unit out and throw it away. So that's not necessarily a green product.
And a lot of them get away with it because they'll say it's a green product because they'll estimate, like, say, a 10-year life. And then once it hits that 10-year mark, you have to throw it out and start over.
Yeah.
So they're using play on words to get what they want.
Yeah. Yeah. So those are some major thoughts that came out of that conference 10 years ago that I was like, oh, it was like a light bulb went off in my head. So the idea of embodied energy and the amount, like, and there's a really cool, I'll have to find the visual. There's a really cool, from the 1980s when gas was really expensive, coming out of the oil issues in the 70s, the embargoes, where there's a gas can that's an old building. The National Trust put it out. And it's talking about, the amount of recycling you'd have to do to put in the amount of energy that's wasted tearing down a building. So historic buildings are inherently green. They're energy efficient, and most of that's just because of how they were built. And they were built with, understanding ventilation, understanding where the sun comes up and goes down, and shading, and all those things that we take for granted when energy is cheap and plentiful. So the National Trust last year put out 8 ways to green your historic house. So I thought we'll go through that, and I can explain to you what we're thinking. So there's conduct an energy audit. So an energy audit, you hire somebody to come in, and there is an energy auditor in Lancaster. I love Tamison, and she always said, make sure you're paying for the audit, because otherwise the person's going to come in and they're going to tell you whatever they're selling is the solution to their audit. So make sure you're paying for the audit, and find somebody who's familiar with older homes, but it will show you where the air is leaking. It'll show you the different pressurizations and where you need to seal. And that's a really good way to be able to weatherize your building so that you keep the cold air in the summer and the hot air in the winter. Don't replace your windows. I know I have been home a lot more lately, and I've caught some daytime TV, and the replacement window commercials drive me crazy. If your windows are more than 10 years old, you must replace them. I'm thinking if your windows are more than 10 years old, they probably, or less than 10 years old, they probably weren't installed correctly, and that's why they're leaking. It has nothing to do with the windows.
But even if they're brand new, you're lucky if you're going to get 7 years out of them now. So
right. So one of the biggest misconceptions is that old houses are drafty because of their windows. There's a lot of engineering studies that show that is really not the case. A well-maintained wood window that is weather stripped with a good storm window on it is just about as energy efficient as a modern replacement window. And the modern replacement windows, again, we talked about not being green because you can't replace and repair those components. Insulate at the attic and the basement, and that'll get you like 80%. That's your biggest bang for your buck if you're looking at insulation. So because of the way a building works, the air comes in at the bottom and then it goes up the sides, and that's a negative plane, so it doesn't really escape out of the sides, but then it goes up to the roof and then goes out. So you want to seal around the bottom and then under the floor and then at the attic.
You can also look up plenty of videos on it. It's called the chimneys.
The stack effect, yeah.
And you'll find it can be done with water as an example, with coloring, smoke. There's many different ways that they've proven it, but it's once you see it visually, mm-hmm. It makes it a lot more believable than somebody just telling it to you.
Yeah. So and there's a lot of insulation options now. You can just do fiberglass, you can do cellulose, there's green, there's wool, there's a lot of different options. Do your research, but there are historic firms that understand historic buildings that will make sure. I know one thing that sometimes gets forgotten when you're doing like a row house in the city is the dormers. Like the dormer mm-hmm. sides need to be, so like just having somebody who understands how the whole building system works. Take advantage of the house's natural passive and heating and cooling. We kind of talked about that a little bit with how buildings are situated. But if you have shutters, close them, because that helps. I mean, that's what they were made for, closing them to keep the warm air in, keeping the sun out, and you don't have to do it all day, but during certain times of the day. And
besides that, if you have like a stone or a brick house, yeah, it's a little bit chilly and warmer in the mm-hmm. in the transition of summer and winter months. But that's also, if you think about it, like a stone or brick building right now is going to be holding some of the cold air. So as it gets hotter, it's releasing some of that cold air, which is keeping your house a little cooler.
The thermal gain.
Yep. Yeah. And then you got the opposite at the winter months. So it's like a kind of like a wash air. So
consider installing passive or more renewable types of energy. We see a lot of geothermal on mm-hmm. historic buildings. Solar and wind. Solar's a little bit harder because you do have those panels, unless you're getting the Tesla ones that look like roof tiles, and that would work on some buildings. One thing we do see often is people will install their solar panels on their outbuildings, so like on their barn or on rather than on the main house. And it's a balance. Now we have seen a problem with that recently, where the solar installer tied right into the gable of the 1840 whatever brick house,
and it was about 80 feet away from the building with no post or no pole in between. So anytime the wind would blow, all that tension would just yank on the wall, and it actually started to pull the gable end away, and I had to go out and reinforce it, put like all thread through and tighten it up with the old star system that they still make. Mm-hmm. And so that way it kind of pushes on each other, so it's not moving anymore. But at the same time, they made them take it down and put it into the ground, so that there was no future even possibility of that happening.
So they put it underground, which which is smarter anyway, because then
if the wind won't blow it out,
Right.
ice and all that, trees falling won't blow it out. It's a much smarter way of doing it nowadays.
Yeah, it is. So pay attention to your landscaping. Trees, that was another thing that people really understood before, was like, if you have a tree that's going to lose its leaves, you know, a shade in the summer, and then it'll give you the solar gain in the winter.
Yep.
So change your light bulbs, you know, use more energy efficient light bulbs. Reuse old materials or salvage. You know, if you're looking for, you know, replacement pieces for your house, keeping the construction waste out of the landfill. I know if we have something that we've taken out of a house that's still good, I'll take it to Habitat Restore, because then we're not throwing it away, and that just helps. That just helps keep everything a little bit greener.
And if you're also looking for, like, there's actually a salvage yard. You can go get like old glass. You can get old wood, old flooring.
Hardware.
You can get hardware all over the place that's salvaged. I mean, there's so many options to get this older stuff than trying to find a new, you know, it looks okay. And then like the hardware, it looks good, but then after about 6 months, it starts to pill and chip because it's just plated with,
unless you buy expensive.
Unless you buy the ones that say like solid brass and then it'll last, and you're only buying it once, but it's kind of a give and take.
So, and the National Trust did put out a study of the greenest building, quantifying the environmental value of building reuse. And the quote from that is that it takes 10 to 80 years for a new building that's 30% more efficient than the average performing existing building to overcome, through its efficiencies, the negative climate change that is impacted by the construction process. So, you know, it takes a long time, even if it's like a LEED or a green building. Do you have any questions?
The